when I was little and was born in Arkansas, and uh, it was just a great life. My mother and father, they were such good people and loving people. They loved all of their children. There was 8 of us. I had four wonderful brothers and three wonderful sisters. I couldn't have had better. And me being the youngest, I think I got a lot of attention, and their family, their children, all. I feel like that I'm the last aunt there is around, and that the good Lord must have left me here to kind of see after them. And I think it's wonderful to have my family that love me enough to come from far away to see me on this date. My daughter, she's worked hard to convince me that this is what we need to do. And I love her. When I was growing up, my father, he worked on a farm, and my mother, she just kept house, and that was a big job. But I had my one sister that really looked after me, and she was kind of like a second mother to me, because I wanted to be with her, and I wanted to be with my mother at the same time a lot of times when I was little. But my oldest brother was Carlos Brown, and when I come along, he had already married to a very sweet woman, and they had moved to Kansas City, Missouri, and they had 3 children, and they're all just wonderful, wonderful. And then my oldest sister was Lola Russell, and she had, I believe it was 9 children. She had twins, a boy and a girl, and I had never seen twins before, but we all grew up together, and it was just wonderful seeing them. But we lost her, though, at an early age, and I still today miss her, because she was a wonderful mother and she's a wonderful sister to me, and I just loved her so much. And my next was my sister Dola Daly, and she had, I believe she had 9 children also, and she was always wonderful to me, and I loved going to see her and her family, and we keep in touch. And then my brother, that was Luther Brown, he had some very, very sweet children, and we were always close. And then I had.
Can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yes.
I'm sitting over here at the side, but I got the lucky chance to interview my mother a little bit recently before today, and I want to just add a couple funny things that you told me.
Okay.
When you talked about Carlos to me, you told me that your first special memory that comes to your mind was that you had never received a package in the mail ever, until one time he and his wife Lily mailed you a dress in the United States mail, and you couldn't believe it. It was amazing to you that could actually happen. And today we take that so for granted.
Well, I was so used to having dresses, though, that had been handmade at
Yes.
home. May made most of my dresses,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was used to that. I wasn't used to a dress that come from a store. That was the big thing that was so great. But they did look after me.
And I know for Dola, you told me your special memory, your first thing that comes to your mind is when you would go to her house, she had hundreds of jars of canned goods everywhere you looked.
Yes.
That was just unbelievable that she had all that food and had done all that work to do it. And the last one you just spoke about was Luther. And
Yes.
I thought this was really hysterical, so I just got to add some words in here. That one time you were telling Luther that you had been shopping at some antique stores, and that you were looking for an old cream can, and you had been hunting for quite a while to find one. And you said he laughed so hard that he laughed at you, and he said, "Oh, for goodness sake, go out back and look behind the barn. There's lots of them for free." And so you did that.
I still have that
Do you?
today. Yes, I do.
Oh, that's so
I
funny.
painted it, though. It looks like me now.
And as an artist, of course you would paint it,
Of
right?
course, I signed my name to it, so somebody can have that one of these days. I love it. Yes.
And in your list of brothers and sisters, Aunt May was next.
Yes, she was the one that looked after me, and she's the one that when she got married in my mom and dad's front yard. And I, I, I knew she was going to leave because she had told me, that she had to leave, but that she would come back and get me. But when she started to leave, her husband had a horse and a wagon. I don't know, might have been more than one horse, probably more than one horse. But anyway, they got in the way. They were going to get in the wagon to leave, and I started crying and crying. And she said, "I promise I'll come back in the morning and get you." And so she did. She come back the next day, and she got me and let me go home with her. And so she'd bring me back and forth.
So her honeymoon was with her baby sister.
And the
in
one
tow.
thing I didn't tell you about, though, I don't think, but she would always sew because she would make me dresses, and she even made my little panties to match my dress back then. Little girls never wore pants, they always wore dresses. And so she was sewing, and I was sitting on the couch beside her and watching her sew. And then she went to sleep, just sitting there. And so while she was taking a little nap, I picked up a razor blade and one spool of her thread, and I cut it. I cut it all the way through. And so I don't know why I did it, but anyway, I laid it down, and when she woke up and she started to pick up her thread was all coming off of the spool. And she said, "Now, who did that?" And I told her that it was, I forgot what the man's name was that worked for her husband. But anyway, I told her that he come in and that he cut the thread. And so she didn't question me about it any further. She just said, "Well, okay," I guess she said, "I'll talk to him about that or something," and let it go. She didn't get on to me. She never did get on to me about anything. But I always remembered that, and she would, every time she'd start to sew something, she'd say, "Well, my thread hasn't cut yet," or something like that, teasing me. I never lived that down. No, she'd always do that. But she was just wonderful to me, and I lived with her so often. And when my mother and dad moved from Arkansas, they moved up to Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and they lived there. Well, I did not like that because there was no one there my age. I was getting to where I wanted to work and all, and there was nothing to do. So my sister said, "Well, you come and live with us," and she said, "You'll find something to do." So she and her husband, it was during the war, and they worked at Curtis Wright, both of them, and she had the three boys, which was Herschel and Bub and Harold at the time, and they were all little. And so I said, "Well, I can watch them." And I started watching them, but then I decided I could work. So I decided to go look for a job, and I went to a restaurant. There was only, by the airport, we lived right by the airport. There was only one restaurant there, and there was no restaurant at the airport at the time. There was just a little coffee shop, and so I went over, and there was two men that run the restaurant, and it was a pretty good sized restaurant. So I asked for a job, and they asked me if I'd ever worked, and I said no. I think I was about 16 years old at the time. But during the war, it was hard to get people to work. And they said, yeah, we'll hire you. You can start. And said, we'll start you tomorrow. So I just started working. And I worked there. And I just loved it though. Because you could work as many hours you want. And every time somebody would want a day off, I would fill in for them because I wanted the money. I found out that it was pretty good to have money coming in. And then if you got a tip, well, if you got 15 cents, that was quite a bit. Sometimes a quarter, oh my, you was really doing good if somebody tipped you a quarter. But anyway, but that was at the time that dirigible, was there, and they had all of the higher ups, like from St. Louis there, that was going to go up in it, and so the owners, everybody wanted to go outside to see it when it took off. And so they told us all of the help that we could go outside to watch it. And we was watching it, and that's when it blew up and it burned. So it spoiled everybody's day. It was just a terrible, terrible thing that happened. And that's one thing in my mind that I always think about. It was one of, I guess, the worst things I had ever seen, in my life. And but at the time that the war started, well, I had the four brothers, but my three brothers all had to go at the same time, and they were all gone. And then you were not allowed to talk about anything. You could get no mail from anyone, or there was no phone calls or nothing, and we would go for months not hearing from any of them. And my oldest brother, Carlos, he didn't have to go because he had a service station, and he worked there, and he had two children at the time, I think, during the war. So he didn't have to go. But when I think about my mother, I think I don't know how she got through all of those years. It had to be really, really hard for her to not be able to hear, from her sons, and not knowing if they were okay or not. And my grandfather, he was my mother's father. His name was Isa Poteet, and he would come and stay with us a few days. Sometimes he'd stay a month at a time with us, and then he would go back to Tennessee where his other family was.
Now, this is your mother's parents?
That's my mother's father.
He was Isaac Poteet, and he married Setta, Setta Crowder, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
And she passed away the year that I was born. I was a baby when she was born. So, and my father, I never knew his father or his family other than his brothers. I knew his brothers. And we would go back to Tennessee and see some of the family there. And we'd go to Oklahoma and visit. And my mother had and my dad had he had a brother, and she had a brother that lived in Oklahoma. Uncle Bedford was my mother's brother, and Uncle Zach was my father's. And their wives was Mary and Katherine, and so that's what my mother named me after them then. So.
I'm sorry, your mother named you after who? Two of her favorite people, I know you told me.
Yes,
Two aunts.
Yes.
So the first aunt was Mary Poteet, and the other one was
Catherine Brown.
Catherine Brown.
So my dad's brother.
And when you were little, did they always just call you Mary?
Well, everybody did, but we didn't see them very often because, the mileage, and we didn't have transportation and all. So I can recall them coming to visit us, the four of them coming to visit us when I was small. And then, of course, when I got older, and we would take my mother and father back, and and visit with them at the time, so they could go see them.
Did your parents and your brothers and sisters just call you Mary all the time?
No, I was called Mary Catherine, until, I guess when I married, then I was not called other than Mary. I lost the Catherine there. And then,
I'm going to go back just a little bit.
okay.
See, some of this I haven't heard, and I'm so fascinated with it. You were talking about your brothers and sisters, but I want to spend another minute and talk a little bit about Pete and then Glenn.
Yes, yes.
Pete, you told me a special memory you had of him was when he was in the CC's, that he sent you a $10 bill.
Yes. Pete always looked after me too, see. That's why I was saying, when I was little and I was going to pick cotton, he told me to get on his cotton, sack that he put his cotton in, and he pulled me around to keep the worms off of me. And so he always did things like that for me. And he always made sure that he sent me a note or sent me a little Easter card or something. And so if I needed something or wanted something, then I would write him a little note, when he is in the CC camps, because that was the way that he was real ambitious, and he wanted to do well in life, and he knew he would not get schooling and all that he wanted. So when he went in the CC camps, then they taught him a lot of things, and then he went to school and all. And then when the war started, well, he volunteered, he and two of his friends, and so he went away. But he was sent to Alaska. See, at that time, that was like the other side of the world to us when we would think about that. And then I have some pictures of him that was taken when it was real cold and he was outside, he was on this hill, but they were, in service. So, and then Luther, he was in the service, he was in the army, and he was sent to Germany, and he drove ambulance. And so I don't recall how long he was gone, but he was gone quite a long time. And he got hurt, and then he was discharged after that because he couldn't go back, to work. So it took him a while to get his life back together and all. And
well, Uncle Pete stayed in the service, though.
Yes, Pete, he did well. He was stationed in Washington, D.C. for a long time, and he was over the services that they had for the military, in charge of the men, that went out to do the services and all for the men in service that come back, that was deceased and all. So he was there for several years, but he was stationed in Germany for a long time because he was there during the Nuremberg trials. And he was there for, I think it was 8 years that he was there, because that went on and on and on for a long time. And but he loved Germany. He said that was a really good place to live and all at that time. And then when he come back to the States, then they sent him to Vietnam, and he was there for a year. And then he was sent back, and then he volunteered to go back for another year because things didn't work out at home like he thought they would. And so he was having a little problem there, he and his wife. So anyway, I think he did okay, though. When he come back, he was all right. And then when he got out of service, then he uh, come to live with me, he always had a room at my house. And he and my husband, George, was very close together, and so they were like brothers instead of, you know,
I can
both
remember,
of them being servicemen.
yeah, yeah, I remember Uncle Pete never called you Mary or sister. When he spoke to you, he always called you honey.
He did, yes, he did.
Did that start when you were very little?
Uh-huh. Oh, yes, he always made over me. Yes, I can recall that when he was dating, when he was still home and he was dating, and so I got old enough, you know, I wanted to go with him, and so then one night I started crying, and I said, well, he said, yo, you can't go with me tonight. He said, I won't be home early, and so I started crying, and he said, oh, well, I don't have to go. So he stayed home with me.
You're just a little tiny bit spoiled.
And so anyway, he teased me about that a lot of times, and I said, I knew if I cried enough, you'd stay home with me, you know.
And your
But-
last brother that we haven't mentioned was your brother, my Uncle Glenn.
Yes, Glenn was a precious guy, and we had lots of fun, and he worked for me many years there, and um, he was always had a lot of friends, and
Mm-hmm.
and when he retired and moved to the country, and all of the family, all of the guys and all would go out there to go deer hunting and fishing, because he lived on a lake in Missouri. I wanted to say Terre de Lac, that's where we had a home. And he always had a lot of friends, and all of his grandkids would come, and he'd take them fishing and so forth. So, but he always had guns, and he loved his guns, and so did Pete. Pete loved his guns, you know. When he retired and had his own apartment and all, he had all kinds of guns in a cabinet. And then when he passed away, I told Glenn, I said, you can have Pete's guns. You take them. I don't want them here in the house any longer. You take them out of here, because I didn't want anybody else having them, you know, but Glenn.
Mm-hmm.
So he did. So everything worked out okay there.
Now, you
But-
told me a story about when you were real little and Uncle Glenn, and you said a special memory you had from your childhood with him was that he would dance with you at your friend's house. He was about 15 and you were younger, but he would still take you.
Yes.
And he would dance with you, and you told me you always just respected and loved him extra much because as a 15-year-old, he was never embarrassed to be dancing with his little sister. He always
Yes.
thought that was just fine.
Well, we had a friend, and her mother and father, they liked for her to have parties at their house, you know, so they knew we were all there, and they knew all of us, you know, but they made sure that we were dancing, you know. And she had a Victrola, you know, the big 78 records and all of that. And so they would take all of her furniture out of her room, and they had hardwood floors. And they would play the music, and all of us would dance. But the younger girls, you know, and they didn't know how to dance. But see, Glenn and Pete, well, Pete would always dance with me also. So I kind of thought, well, I really thought I knew how to dance, you know. And I guess
Speaking of that, what's a couple of the silliest things you ever did? One was, I know when you said when you taught people.
Oh, when I taught the girls how to dance, yeah, they said, well, we would like to dance, but we don't know how. And I said, I can teach you how, but you have to dance with me, and then the guys will dance with you when they see that you can dance. So it worked out pretty good like that. And I had a lot of friends because they wanted me to teach them to dance.
But you told me it was one of the silliest things because you didn't really know how to dance. You
Well,
just did
obviously
some.
I didn't know how to dance.
Another one of the silliest things you did as a child was with Glenda.
Oh, when Glenda and I smoked. Oh, when we went. Well, we had grapevines down between the barn and our house, somewhere down from our house,
Uh-huh.
and so we had seen. I guess the elderly people. I think back then everybody smoked, because Grandpa Poteet, when he was making a living for his family,
Mhm.
he grew tobacco.
Mhm.
It's hard for me to think about that, but that was what he made. He made quite a bit of money on when he was
Mhm.
growing up and just raising the tobacco.
Yeah.
And I guess all of his family and everything worked with that. But anyway, Glenda and we decided that we would try smoking. So we went down and got us a grapevine, and we took us forever. I don't know how we ever got it lit, but we did. Just one. And so I don't remember which one of us, but one of us puffed on it, and when I puffed on it, and it burned my tongue so bad, and I was choking, and we got tickled. And I said, "Put that thing out. I'm never going to smoke again." That did it for me. That was enough. I didn't need any
That's
more
funny.
smoking. Well,
When you were little, you were telling me your favorite pastime when you were little was with catalogs.
oh, we didn't have. You couldn't go to the store and buy any toy. There was no toys in stores for
Mhm.
children.
Mhm.
But I always, in my mind, I wanted a big house with a lot of furniture and all in it, and I knew how I wanted to decorate it. I guess I wanted to be a decorator. And so I would cut out the pieces of furniture that I liked, and I would make squares, on the floor and all the imagination, and I would cut out and fix my rooms like I wanted them. So I kind of grew up knowing, that I wanted a big house someday. I was sure I would have one. So anyway, I started working.
That's fun.
But back when I went to work at my first real job there at the restaurant, well, there was only two airplanes that come into Lambert Field at the time
Oh,
that
uh-huh.
would come in, and so one of the planes though had to have food put on it. So the restaurant where that I was, Winnie Mae Restaurant, it was called,
Mhm.
and so they had a lady that worked in the kitchen, and she fixed the food and would take it over there and put it on the plane. And after I worked there just a short time, she said, "Would you like to help me to put the food on?" She said, "I need some help." And I said, "Sure, I will do that." And so anyway, from then on, when she'd want to put, every day had to
Mhm.
have the food on the certain flight. So I would help her to go over there in the little planes, And now when I think of them, how small they were, but we would take the food over there and put it on the plane for them. And so as long until your dad come along, and I got married suddenly, and so that was the ending of my working there. But I enjoyed it. I had a good time, and I love that.
What did you
And
do next for work?
well, then the next thing I did then, I went to work for the telephone company. Um, I needed a job, and I thought, well, I'll go to the telephone company because I can do that, because I could be a telephone operator. And my sister said, "You can do that." She said, "I'm sure you can." So when I went and I put my application in, they hired me. I think there was about 18 of us that they hired at the same time. And we went in training, and we had 2 weeks training. And at the end of 2 weeks, I think there was 4 of us that made it
Oh my
out of
goodness.
all that they hired.
Mhm.
So I worked for them, and then when they was going to do away with the office where I worked in Overland, Missouri, and then they wanted me to go downtown to the big office down there and work, but I didn't have a car at the time. So I thought, well, I don't know. I probably will have to look for a different job. And just happened when I went home and I was telling my sister, and she said, I bet I know where you could find a job, because she knew a lady that was working for Paul and Lou Lammers. They had a small motel. She said it's only 24 units. And she said, this lady that's working over there that I know, she said her husband's been overseas and he's returning, and she's gonna have to give him her notice. And so she said, go over there and see if they will hire you. And I said, oh yeah, I would like to do that. I think that would be good to learn that business. Mm-hmm. So she took me over there one evening, and so they interviewed me and they hired me. So I stayed with them and worked there at the motel. And then they built a Sands Motel right across the street. And so then I would go over there when they would go on a trip or something, and I would take care of all of the banking and do different things, you know, that they needed me to do over there. And then after I worked there about 2 years, and then they told me that they had a chance to lease a new motel that was going up in St. Charles, right on the river there. And it was 100 units, and all, you know, told me about it. And they said, would you like to run that? And I said, you think I can? And they said, well, we know you can, but they said the whole thing is we have to sign a 20-year lease. And we have to know that if you want to take it, and they told me how much they would pay me to do this. And they said the pay will be the same all the time, but we will give you bonuses to make up, you know, for it. And so anyway, I said, yes, I will do it. I will stay 20 years. And so they said, okay. Well, back then you took people's word for things, and they were, well, you knew them very well. Yes. And they were, if they told you something, that was it, you know, you could believe what they told you. And so they hired me, and I went to work for them, and I just loved it every minute. And so they did so well there, and then they told me that there was someone that had filed bankruptcy on a motel that was closer into the airport, and they thought I needed to own it. And I said, well, I don't know if I can do both of them. And they said, sure you can. So they said, you've got somebody that you can train to be your assistant manager here, and you can have the other motel and you can run both of them. So they said the next morning we had to be at the bank when the bank opened, because there was others that wanted to pick that up. And of course we knew, you know, the banker and everything there. So we were there when the doors opened, and we went in and talked to the banker, and he said, well, he says, you know, we want $200,000. And he said, you can have the motel. Well, I didn't have $2, much less than $200,000. And Paul and Lou said, that's okay. He said, we'll sign for you, that you can do that. And so anyway, they put their house up, you know, as collateral, because he said, well, we have to have collateral, you know, and he said, that's okay. So anyway, they put their house up, and they told me that was mine. Well, of course, they had a good attorney and a bookkeeper. Of course, I'd worked for him for years, you know, and he'd work for me and all. So, and anyway, they flew to Oklahoma. There was a man there that they had met, and so they told him that they wanted him to come and look at the motel, that I needed a loan for $200,000. So he come one day right after that, and he flew in, and he come out, and he looked at the motel, and he went back to my house, and and I had an organ there, and he sat down and he played all kinds of music, and he was the neatest guy, and he was just so funny. And so he said, "Yeah, I'll give you the loan." He says, "That's okay." So he says, "As soon as I get back to the office," he said, "You'll get it. We'll take care of it." So he did. He did that. And so anyway, for 7 years, I kept the motel going, and it was growing and doing really well. And so the bookstore next door, there was a minister over there. They brought me customers, that would come in, and I had a man come talk to me one day, and he said, "Would you sell your motel?" And I said, "Well," I had somebody tell me that, it was a real estate man. I said what I could probably get for it, but I said I'm not going to sell it for what he was wanting. I said I want more money than that. And so he said, "Well, would you take $1 million too?" And I said, "Well," I figured I owed about 50,000 yet on my. I said, "Well, I only way I would do that is if we could sign this and we could get it closed real fast, because my daughter, she's wanting to go to Florida, and I want to go with her." And I said, "But if they don't want to do it," I said, "there's a company," I said, "but they're foreign people, and I really don't want to sell to them. But," I said, "I think I probably could get more out of it if I would sell to them." So he said, "Well, let me see." So he went back over. He called me back up, and he said, "Let's have a meeting." So I sold my own motel. I didn't have to go through anything. So anyway, I was able to take care of my child and help her and
get down to
and come to Florida.
Now, during all the years that you were working in the motel business and working for Paul and Lou, and then running your own place and still helping them out sometimes as well,
Mhm.
during that time, you and George were married.
Yes.
And he was in the military. That was his job. And so he traveled a lot. So you had times when you had him home and times when he was gone for a long time.
Yes. Well, he stayed in 20 years because he went in when the war first started. Well, he was in the reserves.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went right in, he and his brother-in-law, and of course he was in the dental lab, and he was stationed in St. Louis for about 2 years there before that he was sent,
Mm-hmm.
overseas. But we had a good life, and
You all were
everything.
married just a little over 50 years, weren't
We
you?
was married 50 years and 37 days.
One of the funny things that George told me about you one time was, he said when he was stationed in San Antonio, Texas, that it was Thanksgiving, and you decided that you wanted to be with him and fly down and spend Thanksgiving with him. And he had a little apartment there, I guess off base, where he had been stationed. So he said when you got there and he got your luggage, and when he got it back and he opened it up, here was an entire Thanksgiving dinner in one of the suitcases that you had brought. And he had a full turkey and dressing and cranberry, a whole dinner inside one big suitcase that you had lugged from St. Louis. And he said, as long as I live, I'll never get over my shock at opening a suitcase and seeing a Thanksgiving dinner.
Yes, he said, "Honey, the only bad thing about this is," he told me when I was going to come, he said, "everything is closed." He said, "They really close everything here. There'll be nothing open where we can go get anything to eat." And I said, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of that."
So he told me that story a half a dozen times over the years. And he said, no matter what I did in service,
Yeah.
your mom was always right with it. Whatever I needed, she took care of it.
Well, when he was in France, he would say, he would say when he had leave and all, he'd say, "You want to fly over here?" And I'd say, "No, you come home," because I knew how much he liked to come home. And I said, "I can always go to France," and so he would come home then.
Well, you
And-
traveled a lot in your life.
Yes, I was very fortunate because our motels was the best Western motels, and so we would always go to Vegas and spend a week at Vegas, and we always had a very good time there because Vegas was wonderful at that time, and then we would fly from there to different countries. And we went to Hawaii 2 different times. Of course, it wasn't a state at that time. And I went to Hong Kong twice, and went to Japan twice. I went to Taiwan. Went to Australia and New Zealand. And seemed like every year we went somewhere, and it was always wonderful because there was so many of us that they would have either one big plane or sometimes there would be 2 planes, and we would all stay at the same hotels. We'd just take over whatever the newest, biggest hotels was for the time that we were there. And you went with me. George went with me several times, but George had traveled enough that, so he really did not like flying. So he would say, "You take Kay with you. I'll stay home." so it worked out real good because he'd stay home and take care of the dogs and look after the motel when we had the motel now when he retired. So, and you were always busy, and we were so proud of you and with all that you did. And I remember when you was just out of high school and you wanted to go to work, and I was scared to death you wouldn't get a college degree. I said, "Oh, honey," I said, "if you work, you're never going to finish college, and I want you to have an education because you have to work really, really hard when you don't have the education." So you made me really, really proud. And of course, you were always just such a perfect daughter. Yes, you were. And then my little grandson come along, Matthew, and he was just the most delightful child. Grandpa and I just thought we were in heaven. We had gone to St. Louis, and when we arrived there, at my sister's house, and she said, "You're going to get a phone call right away." And I said, "I am?" And she said, "Yes, in just a few minutes." And you called and you said, "I just got my little boy." So you told us about it. Well, then I wanted to go home right away so I could see you and that little baby. And so he's just been so precious, and his grandma and grandpa, he was just the love of his life, and of course he loved you so much, and we were so happy for you that you had a little boy and everything. So I've had the most wonderful life. God has certainly been good to me. All
nice.
through my life.
It's been so great sitting here sharing all these thoughts with you. Of course, you and I do a lot more than that, but I wanted us to kind of close off, but I'm going to come over here and sit with you here. I wanted to kind of close off our little discussion here today because you told me that you said, "Let me give you some advice for your life." And I thought it was so great. I thought you should share it. The first thing you told me was you said, first, everybody needs to look out for themselves. Don't count on anybody else doing it for you, right? Remember when you told
That's
me
right,
that? You said, "I've worked hard all my life, and I think if we all do that, the world will be better, and so will we," right?
Yes.
And something I know everyone that knows you would agree with when you said always be optimistic. Right.
Yes.
You want to add anything to that?
Well, there's just so much to life, but it's so good, but you have to make it what it is. You have to love other people, be respectful of other people, and your family. Your family always comes first. And I have got the most wonderful family and have had all my life. Nobody could have had a better family. And they still, when it comes to my Christmas or birthday or whatever, I hear from all of them. None of them leave me out. And I just think that's wonderful because so many families are not close and it's hard to imagine. But you have to know that it works both ways. And I've always tried to be fair with each one of them and let them all know that I love them all the same.
And the last thing you told me was always look your best.
Yes.
And be clean and neat. Yep. Want to add to that one?
Yes, because I can recall you saying, Mother, I want to have a good job where I can wear high heels like you do and go to work. And
I did.
And your mother always had high heels on, didn't she?
You did. You did.
I just said, and then I said to you one time, if I get to where I can't do my toenails, will you make sure they're done?
That's a deal.
So we always looked after each other, honey, and loved each other, and that's the main thing. And if you do that, and if you respect other people, God will always take care of you. Yes, we have to give Him praise for what goes on in our lives. Yes, we do.
What a fun birthday talk.
It's been
So we're going to
wonderful.
say goodbye and tell
Yes.
everybody we love you so much.
Yes, and our family, oh, it's coming to see us. I can't wait. I just can't wait to see all of them.